Revenge with Karen.
The first red flag wasn't the 8:07 a.m. calendar invite titled Quick Sync. It wasn't even Sharon's voice, which had that brittle, fake calm tone she used when laying off interns who cried too easily. No, the real gut punch was the extra chair in the glass conference room. Centered, waiting, like a trap disguised as ergonomic seating. I stepped in with my coffee, still hot, still mine, and sat across from my mentor, the woman who'd called me her right hand for the past 8 years, back when we were duct taping a product demo together in a WeWork kitchen. Sharon barely looked up from her surface. "Thanks for coming in early," she said, as if this were a favor, as if she wasn't about to flip my whole life inside out with the same voice she used to order oat milk. Then she smiled that tight, executive smile, like buttocks got confused and froze her empathy instead, said the board had decided it was time to evolve leadership. I blinked. Evolve? Yes. As in strategic pivot. She gestured toward the door like she was introducing a magician. Meet Lila. In walked a woman in lavender pumps and a blazer the color of artificial blueberries, carrying a laptop she hadn't even bothered to power on. She air-kissed the room like it was a fundraiser and not the scene of a corporate crime. "So excited to optimize synergy here," she chirped, like someone who'd swallowed a marketing white paper and confused it for a personality. Sharon continued, "Lila's going to bring a fresh perspective. She has incredible energy, great board presence, and deep connections across the growth ecosystem. Translation: she's got a LinkedIn premium account and once shook hands with someone at Bain Capital." I felt my pulse slow, like my heart decided, let's just go quiet for this. I stared at the desk, when I'd sat at when we were nobody, when I'd hand-wired our first onboarding funnel and rewritten the pitch deck on my birthday. I thought about the sticky notes still pinned to my monitor from the day our series closed. Not bad for two women with a dream. Apparently, one of us had upgraded that dream to include a swap-out clause. I smiled, not because I wanted to, but because that's what you do when your lungs have been replaced with silence. Of course, happy to support the transition. I shook Lila's hand, manicured icy, trembling slightly, probably from caffeine or ambition. Then I walked back to my desk, past the new interns who still thought Sharon walked on water and past the junior devs who didn't know they were watching a body drop. I packed slowly, not dramatically. A plant, a notebook, a flash drive. Left the branded hoodie. Took the backup copy of the roadmap. And if you've made it this far, you're probably the kind of person who knows how fast things can change in one quiet morning. If you're into stories where the revenge is slow, cold, and delivered with a smile under stage lights, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Trust me, it helps us keep telling these stories the way they deserve to be told. Anyway, back to the body on the floor. Nobody said thank you. No hug. Not even a post-it farewell from the ops girl who used to ask me for career advice like it was gospel. I slid my laptop into my bag, turned in my badge, and left through the side door because I didn't need a last look. I'd already memorized every inch of that building. I helped build it. Outside, the air was too bright, too free. I sat in my car and stared at my reflection in the black screen of my backup monitor, a woman with nothing and everything. 3 years later, I'd walk onto a stage in front of $500 million and remind them exactly who the hell I was. But for now, I just drove home. Quietly, strategically. There was no LinkedIn post. No on to my next adventure. No grid of smiling team photos. No dramatic goodbye caption about bittersweet transitions or how grateful I am for the ride. I left like a ghost slips out of a house fire, silent, intact, taking only what mattered. My phone buzzed a few times that first week. Junior PMs asking if it was true. A couple investors fishing around, pretending to care. Even our old office manager sent a "you okay?" with a sad bitmoji, which somehow made me feel worse than the firing. I replied to none of them. I wasn't ready to explain what had happened, because there was no explaining what it felt like to watch someone else wear your skin. Instead, I did what I've always done. I observed. I listened. I took notes. The world moved on without me, sure, but it moved crooked. I kept my old Slack credentials. No one thought to revoke them. I didn't type. I just watched. The product roadmap looked like it had been rewritten by someone playing Mad Libs with a Forbes article. Leverage synergy across vertical user bases to optimize retention touchpoints. I'd built a conversion engine, turned it into a networking cruise. I opened a private Google Doc and typed one word at the top, all caps, Blackbird. No idea why. Maybe because blackbirds don't scream when they fly away. They vanish, then reappear somewhere better. A few weeks later, I found myself at a bar in the marina, one of those open-plan cocktail joints where ex-founders and failed VCs go to flirt with denial. I wasn't there to network. I was there to remember who I was when no one was looking. At the table behind me, a voice broke through the din. Yeah, and then they pivoted the roadmap toward an omnichannel hybrid stack. Super forward-thinking. I froze. That was my strategy. Or what used to be. At least before Lila got her hands on it and started using buzzwords like seasoning. And the viral loop, another voice asked. Oh yeah, the guy said. They're calling it the loyalty flywheel now. Total game changer. I turned my head just slightly. Two guys in startup hoodies, sipping overpriced mezcal and mispronouncing innovation like it owed them money. They were talking about the company I built like it was a failed group project they'd audited on Reddit. Like none of the things I'd fought for, user empathy, scalable onboarding, authentic feedback loops, meant anything. Just slides and spin now. Sharon's vision through Lila's mouth. I sipped my drink and opened notes on my phone. Wrote, don't build what they understand. Build what they'll never get their hands on. I started sketching. Not the usual idea dump. Not another startup I'd half execute and abandon when the next advisory gig came along. No, this was different. I wrote out a structure. Then rewrote it. Every piece had to be resistant to the kind of rot I'd just lived through. Type of company that couldn't be hijacked by someone with a pretty smile and no convictions. A business without fluff. No weak center. No strategic ego hires. I pulled together my private contact list. Designers I trusted. Engineers who didn't believe in shortcuts. Ops leads who still remembered what shipping on time actually meant. I didn't promise them anything yet, but I made a note by each name. Invite later. Only when ready. For now, I watched, observed how fast Sharon's empire was being eaten from the inside. I tracked Lila's public comments, interviews where she said things like we're exploring our humanity as a product, whatever the hell that meant. Blackbird stayed offline, just a word on a doc, but each day I added to it. No press, no leaks, no trace, and no mistakes this time. I registered the LLC on a Wednesday at 2:17 a.m. from the kitchen counter of a sublet with wobbly cabinets and a refrigerator that hummed like a dying robot. No fanfare, no co-founder photos, just me, my laptop, and a legal Zoom tab open next to a spreadsheet titled Enemies and Assets. Name, North Figure Consulting. It sounded boring because it needed to. The kind of name that disappears into inboxes and NDA footers. That same week, I reached out to Sophie, one of the best UX designers I'd ever worked with, who'd left the company after Sharon accused her of not thinking cross-functionally enough. Translation: she didn't suck up. I pinged her on Signal with 3 words, still hate buzzwords. She responded 6 minutes later with a screenshot of a Slack message from her new manager that said, "Can we gamify the empathy here?" We met for drinks the next night. By the end of the week, I'd brought in Wes and Aaron, 2 devs from the old team who'd quietly slipped out after Lila's cultural refresh town hall, the one with the bean-bag chairs and the phrase radical transparency in Comic Sans. They didn't need convincing. Aaron asked one question, "You leading?" I nodded. That was it. No equity agreements yet. No public promises. Just handshakes, encrypted threads, and a single guiding principle: we build in the dark. And we build it right. I took advisory gigs through North Figure. Nothing too big, just enough to keep cash flowing and ears to the ground. I kept my name off the paperwork. Let my alias sign the contracts. Strategy work for fintech startups, health tech flops, even a fashion AI that thought it was curing loneliness. I smiled, took their money, and took notes on every mistake they were too proud to see. Meanwhile, the doc labeled Blackbird evolved. What started as bullet points became wireframes, then flowcharts, a full-blown blueprint. We weren't making an app, we were building infrastructure. The kind of engine that lets other engines run without choking on scale. Quiet, fast, unbreakable, and most importantly, ours. VCs started sniffing around. One of Sharon's old friends pinged me through a mutual. "Heard you're cooking again. Let's talk pre-seed." I sent a polite "not raising yet" and blocked his calendar access. I'd been bought once. Never again. No golden handcuffs. No sharks pretending to be dolphins. Then came the inflection point. I met a guy named Curtis through one of my freelance clients. Ran a niche infrastructure firm, secure cloud routing, end-to-end encryption, built by ex-government nerds with no interest in flashy launches or conferences. They were like the plumbing under a skyscraper, invisible, vital, and criminally undervalued. Met in a half-empty coffee shop in Palo Alto that still used punch cards for loyalty points. Curtis wore a hoodie that said "Trust Math, not people." I said, "We're building something. It's going to need roots like yours, but no noise, ever." He sipped his tea and nodded. "We're not in the habit of talking, just delivering." I slid an NDA across the table. He didn't blink. Signed with a pen he brought himself. 1 week later, he had a sandbox test environment live. No Slack, no Notion, no cloud docs that could be mined later. Everything air-gapped local, logged by hand. We used code names and burner phones. Aaron joked we were becoming the startup version of a spy agency. I didn't laugh because he was right. Every morning I woke up clearer than I had in years. There were no board updates. No team all hands with passive-aggressive slide decks. No Sharon, no Lila, just code. Grit. Momentum. We weren't chasing headlines. We weren't pitching VCs in glass towers. We were growing underground, black roots, sharp and deep. A network in shadows, no spotlight. Just the sound of something real being built. It started as a whisper, an out-of-office reply that never came back, a Slack profile that went dark mid-sprint, a recruiter cold messaging an engineer I knew had been core team 6 months ago. One by one, the lights were flickering at my old house. Came the texts. First from Darren, a senior backend dev who'd survived 5 pivots and 2 Sharon tantrums before I left. "Hey, you dodged a bullet," he wrote. "It's a damn mess over here. No punctuation. Just that raw bitterness you only get when you're stuck cleaning someone else's broken ideas with no mop and no budget." He told me Lila had tried to institute a fractal innovation methodology. No one knew what it meant, including her. Sprints got longer. Roadmaps got wider. Engineers were writing code to patch features no one used, based on surveys no one read. Burnout spiked. So did customer complaints. Apparently she brought in a corporate coach to do alignment workshops that involved whiteboards, jazz music, and something called mirror empathy stretching. "Mirror empathy stretching?" I texted back. "Yeah," he replied. Literally had to stand across from a partner manager and describe their feelings while making intense eye contact. I almost quit on the spot. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I wasn't surprised. Lila was doing exactly what I'd expected, building a brand instead of business, feeding investors adjectives while starving the product of oxygen. Then came the bigger ripples. A long-time client of the old company, someone I'd personally onboarded during our series of days, emailed me directly, said they were considering alternate solutions, that things felt disconnected. The word drift came up twice. I thanked them for the note, didn't promise anything, just listened. The next day, I checked Sharon's LinkedIn. Once a temple of humble brag and curated thought leadership, it now read like a slow-motion apology. Gone were the victory laps about building culture, placed with reposts about how failure drives reflection, and a shared article titled "Why Founders Should Step Back to Move Forward." I actually choked on my coffee reading that one, not because it wasn't accurate, but because Sharon had never stepped back from anything. She had pushed, clawed, sweet-talked, and back-channeled her way into every investor dinner and photo op possible. The idea of her embracing humility was like seeing a shark hold a yoga pose. Still, I didn't gloat, not out loud, not online. That wasn't the game. I just updated my Blackbird spec to include one new clause: migration-ready infrastructure. Because if things kept unraveling the way they were, there'd be a lot of orphans looking for a better home. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the email landed. Subject line: Turnaround Advisory Inquiry Confidential. It was from a partner at a mid-sized PE firm I vaguely remembered, and that had backed a failed wearable startup a few years back, but always seemed hungry for redemption. I opened it. They were exploring a quiet acquisition of a struggling but promising tech company. No name mentioned. Just that they needed someone discreet, seasoned, and strategic to evaluate integration options, map out retention plans, and rebuild stakeholder trust. I read it twice, then 3 more times. They didn't know it. They were describing me before Sharon decided to evolve me out of the narrative. I drafted a polite reply, asked for a call, kept it vague, professional. Then I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and looked at the wall across from my desk, the one with the index cards pinned like a conspiracy map. Every feature, every flaw I'd seen others overlook. Every time someone tried to scale before they had stability, every fake strategic hire that collapsed under their own weight. Turns out, watching the building burn down from the outside isn't nearly as satisfying as being handed the blueprints and asked, "How would you fix this?" I smiled. They wanted a turnaround. I was already miles ahead. The firm they were circling was called Voxel, mid-tier SaaS platform with a sexy dashboard and a bloated backend. They'd raised a flashy Series B off the buzzword trifecta: AI, blockchain-adjacent architecture, and empathic UI, whatever the hell that meant. But under the hood, rot. Dev churn through the roof. One CTO in the hospital for stress-induced cardiac irregularities. Feature backlog thicker than a phone book, held together by interns and duct tape. And still, their press team was pumping out medium posts like they were one pivot away from curing loneliness. Perfect. The PE firm didn't need a savior. They needed a cleaner. Someone who could strip the company for parts without triggering panic. Someone who wouldn't blink while quietly euthanizing the glitter-coated Frankenstein they'd inherited. They didn't know I was already holding the scalpel. I said yes. Not as myself. North Figure Consulting took the contract. A discreet external advisor to help assess operational redundancies and untapped value channels. That was the language they used. I signed the contract with my alias, routed through my LLC. Not one mention of Blackbird, not one whisper of me. That's how I wanted it. The first step was the intake audit. I didn't even have to step inside their office, just reviewed access logs, Jira boards, and product roadmaps. Within 48 hours, I knew what was salvageable and what wasn't. What was salvageable? Their internal dev tool, built quietly by a disgruntled senior engineer, ignored by management because it didn't fit the company's customer joy narrative. But it was lean, modular, and absurdly powerful. It solved 3 problems I'd been sketching solutions for in Blackbird's pipeline. I scheduled a one-on-one with the engineer through my shell alias. We talked shop. No pretense, just respect. "What do you really want to build?" I asked. He paused, then answered. And that answer became the new spine of our backend. By the end of the second week, I had carved 5 features out of Voxel's body and stitched them, quietly, surgically, into Blackbird's framework. No one noticed, because no one was looking in the right direction. Everyone was too busy trying to plug the PR leaks and keep their titles intact. The CEO of Voxel thought I was a glorified spreadsheet jockey. He sent me notes like, "Would love to circle back on a shared OKR map for our innovation funnel." I replied on it, gutting his infrastructure with a scalpel and a smile. Meanwhile, I had Aaron and Sophie working overtime on the Blackbird sandbox. We were now running parallel builds, one public, one subterranean. I was testing latency and UI elasticity through Voxel's dev servers while feeding results back into our own system. No one traced it. Why would they? We looked like just another consultant mapping efficiencies. But we were building a machine that didn't need applause to run. Curtis, our infrastructure partner, set up a mirror node architecture. Fully partitioned, fully deniable. Everything we learned from Voxel's chaos was filtered, cleaned, and reassembled with precision. I never took credit, never gave the PE firm reason to suspect. Let them think I was just another ghost contractor looking for a retainer. But every piece I moved was part of a larger pattern. Every redundant API call we identified, fuel for our own latency protocols. Every obsolete product manager we cut, an opportunity to map better workflows. Every user feedback loop I uncovered, another brick in Blackbird's unbreakable core. Then, on a quiet Thursday after 6 hours of nonstop integration testing and a Slack thread with Sophie titled "If We Were Evil, but Ethical," I opened a new tab. Typed, "Incorporate Blackbird Systems." Filed it under a Wyoming LLC, aired through 2 holding shells and a clean offshore proxy. The paperwork didn't list my name, didn't even hint at North Figure, but everything it held, code, design, infrastructure, roadmap, was mine. And no one, not Sharon, not Lila, not the PE firm, knew the storm was already gathering. Because while they were still rearranging furniture on a sinking ship, I was already sailing. Quietly, swiftly, and straight toward them. It started with a whisper in the dark, like most boardroom mutinies do. An email from a man I hadn't heard from in 3 years. Subject line, coffee, just that. No punctuation, no context. But the sender, Robert Leeds, one of the earliest investors in my former company. The kind of guy who wore the same navy blazer to every board meeting and carried silence like a briefcase. We'd never been close. He'd once referred to me as Sharon's sharp scalpel. never realizing I heard him say it. At the time, I'd taken it as a compliment. Now, I saw it for what it was, a tool that could be replaced the moment it drew too much blood. I replied, "Name the place." He picked a quiet cafe in Menlo Park, the kind where the baristas wear ties and the pastries cost more than my first phone bill. I showed up in black jeans and a gray sweater, casual enough to disarm, sharp enough to be remembered. No shell name this time, no alias, just me. He was already seated, stirring a tea he had no intention of drinking. When I sat, he looked up slowly, studied me the way he used to study term sheets, checking for fine print hidden in the eyes. He didn't waste time. "Tell me about Blackbird." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I don't recall announcing it." "You didn't," he said. "But infrastructure guys talk. Especially when someone's quietly eating everyone's latency margins for breakfast." I took a sip of my coffee. "Didn't call me for flattery." He leaned forward. "I called you because Sharon's losing the room." Ah, there it was, the beginning of the end. I didn't need details, I could feel it. The way a storm smells before it hits. Sharon's grip had always depended on projection, on always looking like she knew what came next. But Lila's floundering, the bleeding clients, the burned-out engineers, those weren't just cracks. They were fault lines. "You know," Robert said, "it's a scenario where the board explores a merger. Strategic alignment, fresh leadership." Strategic, I echoed, letting the word hang in the air like a slow knife. He smiled, tight. A different kind this time. I didn't answer right away. Just stared out the window, watching two venture bros argue about crypto tax shelters on the sidewalk. Could I really step back into that world, into that building? After everything? Then again, maybe I wasn't stepping back into anything. Maybe they were stepping into my world now. Hypothetically, I said, if Blackbird were interested, it wouldn't be for capital. Understood, it would be for absorption. Full structural integration. Zero compromise on ops or tech stack. Executive control guaranteed. He didn't blink. I think the board would be open to discussion. "And Sharon?" I asked, though I already knew. He exhaled slowly, like a man trying not to smile at a funeral. "She's lost her immunity." I sat back. The sensation was electric, but cold, like a high-voltage cable buried under years of dirt finally humming again. This wasn't just a return. This was reclamation. The next morning, we sent over a sanitized pitch deck. No founder photos, no vanity metrics. Just hard numbers, killer retention models, and a roadmap that made theirs look like finger painting. They bit. Of course they did. And 2 days later, formal request. Would the founder of Blackbird Systems be open to presenting directly to the board? This time, I didn't hide. I signed the NDA under my real name. No proxy, no alias, no fear. They wanted to meet the future. I was bringing it to their doorstep. The board meeting took place in the same conference room where Sharon once told me I wasn't aligned with the company's evolving vision. Same glossy table. Same overpriced ergonomic chairs. Same view of a parking lot that made junior staff pretend to care about green commuting. The only difference was this time, I wasn't on the agenda, I was the agenda. It was labeled as a strategic review session. Half of them didn't know what they were walking into. The other half did, and came with quiet smiles and notebooks already turned to a fresh page. I didn't attend in person. That was a deliberate choice. Let them make their decision without my shadow in the room. I wanted their yes to be clean, earned, undeniable. I sat 2 blocks away in a nondescript co-working lounge, logged into a secure back channel where Robert messaged me after the final vote. 14-2, approved. I didn't respond immediately. Just stared at the screen. Merger with Blackbird Systems, approved. Contingent upon one clause, full operational transition to incoming leadership. They tried to soften it, call it a leadership evolution, return to visionary roots. But under all the language, it meant one thing: Sharon was out. I scrolled down to the final line, appointing new chief executive officer, my full name. My fingers hovered over the keys. No joy, no rage, just clarity. This wasn't a moment, it was a move. One that had taken 3 years to execute and exactly 5 minutes to finalize. Robert followed up. She didn't speak, not one word. Just stood up and left. Pictured her pale blazer, the delicate little brooch she wore like armor, the quiet scraping of her chair against the floor. For a second, just one, I felt a pang. Not pity, not guilt, just the distant echo of a person I'd once believed in. A woman who used to call me irreplaceable. Funny how replaceable I'd become the moment she thought I wouldn't notice. But that version of me, the one who waited for applause, who needed acknowledgement, who flinched at betrayal, gone. By the time the ink dried on the merger paperwork, Blackbird had swallowed them whole. Our systems were replacing theirs. Our team was guiding the transition. And our values, real ones, not the garbage printed on branded water bottles, were finally steering the ship. The announcement would be made public in 3 days, at the company's annual investor gala. $500 million worth of handshakes and champagne flutes. A ballroom stuffed with VCs, operators, PR flacks who hadn't seen me since I quietly vanished from their newsletters. Perfect. We kept the press release under wraps. Even internal memos referred to me as incoming executive. I wanted their reactions raw, unrehearsed, a perfect storm of confusion, recognition, and dread. I met with the comms director, one of the few remaining staffers I respected. He asked how I wanted to be introduced. Clean, minimal, one line, he nodded. No backstory. Oh, need, they'll recognize me. Back at Blackbird HQ, the real HQ, not the filing cabinet shell we'd registered in Wyoming, I gathered the core team. Sophie, Aaron, Wes, I looked them in the eye. After the gala, we go full integration. No compromise, we do this right. Sophie grinned, full Blackbird, wings out, I said. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and rehearsed my first words. Not to boast, not to sting, just to reclaim the oxygen I'd been denied for years. I was walking back into that building. But this time, I wasn't the scalpel. I was the surgeon. The ballroom was drenched in corporate excess, soft jazz humming under LED spotlights, hors d'oeuvres served on ceramic spoons no one knew how to hold, and clusters of men in identical navy suits trading liquidity metrics like sports scores. Every table had a centerpiece shaped like a stylized bird, unsubtle nod to the merger. They'd wanted symbolism. They were about to get it. I stood near the back, flanked by 2 Blackbird advisors who looked more like hackers than executives. Sophie was somewhere in the crowd, sipping a Negroni and pretending not to eavesdrop. Wes and Aaron had declined to attend, said the air in those rooms made their skin itch. I didn't blame them. The press was already swirling, snapping photos of Sharon near the front. Pale blazer, signature brooch. She smiled when someone asked about vision moving forward, but her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her glass. I watched her pretend to hold court, laughing at half-jokes, nodding at buzzwords, waiting for someone to assure her that everything was still under her control. She didn't know what was coming. Not really. Then the host took the mic. One of those corporate MCs with voice training and too much product in his hair. He ran through the usual fluff, exciting times, transformative growth, unprecedented synergies. A champagne flute clinked. Someone yawned. Then he smiled, that fake, over-rehearsed smile. And now, to usher in this new chapter of innovation and leadership, please welcome the newly appointed CEO of the merged entity. He paused, no name, just that, and in that pause I walked, heels on hardwood, slow, measured, straight through the center aisle of a room that had once cheered my silence. People turned. First confusion. The murmurs started. The head of strategy at Porter and West squinted like she'd seen a ghost. A junior product lead actually gasped, whispering something to her date. The PR director dropped her phone. Sharon stood frozen, glass midair, her grip tightening until her knuckles blanched. I stepped onto the stage and let the spotlight find me. It was hot, brighter than I remembered. I didn't blink. Thank you, I said, nodding to the host. Then I turned to the crowd, scanning faces. Some smiling, some stunned. A few, those who'd quietly rooted for me even after I disappeared, nodded almost imperceptibly. And Sharon, her expression hadn't changed. That same smile stretched too wide. The kind people wear when the floor starts to move beneath them, but they haven't figured out how deep the hole goes. I let the silence breathe for just a second longer. Not long enough to be cruel, just long enough to be undeniable. I'm honored to lead us forward, I said. Not by erasing what's been built, but by restoring what was almost lost. No applause yet. The room was too busy rearranging its understanding of reality. Because the woman they'd seen as a casualty, she'd returned. Not as a memory, as the architect. I turned slowly, the mic still in my hand, letting the weight of the room settle. The kind of pause they teach you in theater school, except this wasn't performance. This was precision. Stage built not for applause, but reckoning. I'd like to introduce the leadership team guiding this new chapter, I said, voice steady. These are the minds behind the systems, the strategy, the infrastructure you'll soon be praising in your portfolios. Heads swiveled, phones half raised. Cameras blinking like nervous eyes. I gestured stage left, and out walked Lila. Yes, that Lila, lavender pumps, buzzword Barbie, the networking wonderkind Sharon had handpicked to replace me. Only tonight she wore black, no fanfare. Hair pulled back, clipboard in hand. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She just stood behind me. Behind, VP of Strategy, reporting to me. The board chair clapped twice, then stopped. One of the early investors, Stephen Cho, I think, leaned to the person next to him and whispered, audible only because the room had turned to velvet, "Oh my God." Sharon's drink was no longer in her hand. I hadn't seen her drop it. I just noticed the stain blooming on the ballroom carpet, slow and sour. She hadn't moved. Her smile was still technically there, but her eyes, those eyes that once scanned quarterly forecasts like gospel, had gone completely, utterly still. I met her gaze, held it, and spoke. Turns out, I said, I was strategic, just in a longer format. The room didn't laugh, they didn't cheer, they just froze. Like someone had cut the sound on reality and left the lights on too long. Behind me, Lila stepped to the side. Not toward Sharon, toward me. A quiet acknowledgement, a new hierarchy. One built on competence, not charisma. Resilience, not rebranding, and Sharon, she didn't sit, didn't storm out. She simply remained, anchored in a room she no longer controlled, listening to her replacement's voice ring out where hers used to echo. I stepped back from the mic and let the host resume, but the spell was already cast. Whatever speech he had queued up fell flat under the weight of what had just happened. There was no need to explain it. The hierarchy had shifted. The silence did all the talking. And in that stillness, I didn't feel rage or pride or vengeance. I felt peace. A strange, humming kind of peace, because I hadn't just taken back what was mine. I'd redesigned the system that once threw me out and made damn sure it would never be able to do it again. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.